December 11, 1978, 2 a.m. Des Plaines, Illinois. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenchak couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the man sitting across from him. John Wayne Gacy, a well-known community figure who threw neighborhood parties and entertained children as Pogo the Clown, had been under surveillance for days. 15-year-old Robert Piest had vanished after telling his mother he was going to talk to a contractor about a job. That contractor was Gacy. As investigators sat in unmarked cars outside 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, watching Gacy's modest ranch house in the quiet suburb of Norwood Park, they had no idea they were staring at one of the most horrific crime scenes in American history. The home looked ordinary: trim lawn, attached garage, just another house on just another Chicago street, where neighbors waved to each other and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. But inside that crawl space, beneath those creaking floorboards, investigators would soon discover something so unthinkable that it would shatter this community's sense of safety forever. What they found there wouldn't just be evidence of Robert Piest's disappearance. It would be the answer to dozens of families' desperate questions. Families who had spent years wondering what happened to their sons, their brothers, their friends, who simply vanished without a trace. The truth hiding beneath that house would reveal that the worst monsters don't lurk in shadows. Sometimes they live next door. Between 1972 and 1978, at least 33 young men and boys disappeared from the Chicago area. Most were teenagers, some as young as 14. They were runaways, they were students, they were boys working summer jobs. Each one was someone's son. Each one had a future. Robert Piest was different from Gacy's previous victims in one critical way. People saw them together. On December 11, 1978, Robert told his mother he'd be right back. He just needed to talk to a contractor about a summer job that paid $5 an hour. She was waiting at the pharmacy where Robert worked, ready to celebrate her birthday with her son. He never came back. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy, a 36-year-old building contractor and community volunteer who lived in the quiet Norwood Park neighborhood, just blocks from where Robert was last seen. Gacy was known in the area. He was a Democratic Party precinct captain. He threw elaborate summer parties where he'd dress as Pogo the Clown and entertain neighbors' children. He had even been photographed with First Lady Rosalynn Carter at a Democratic event. To everyone who knew him, Gacy was helpful, friendly, maybe a little loud, but harmless. Des Plaines police immediately focused on Gacy. They quickly discovered something troubling. Gacy had a criminal record. In 1968, he'd been convicted in Iowa of sexually assaulting a teenage boy and served 18 months before being paroled. He'd moved to Chicago, started his contracting business, and seemingly rebuilt his life. But now another boy was missing after last being seen with him. Investigators obtained a search warrant for 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. On December 13, 1978, they entered Gacy's home for the first time. What they found was disturbing but not conclusive. A high school ring, driver's licenses belonging to missing young men, police badges, handcuffs, pornographic materials involving young males. Gacy had explanations for everything. The ring? Found it. The licenses. Kids left them behind. He was cooperative, charming even, insisting he had nothing to hide. But Lieutenant Kozenchak noticed something else. A strange, sickly sweet smell permeating the house. Gacy claimed it was moisture from a broken sump pump in his crawl space. Police put Gacy under 24-hour surveillance while they built their case. For days, investigators followed him everywhere. Gacy knew they were there. He would wave at them, bring them coffee, even invite them to dinner. He seemed to enjoy the cat-and-mouse game. The pressure was suffocating. Under constant surveillance, unable to sleep, Gacy's carefully constructed facade began to crack. On December 21, 1978, 10 days after Robert Piest disappeared, Gacy invited his lawyer and 2 employees to dinner at a restaurant. During that meal, Gacy made a chilling admission. He told them he'd been the devil and done terrible things. He told his employees where to find a document outlining how to manage his business and his assets. It was essentially a confession in the form of final arrangements. Within hours, Des Plaines police obtained another search warrant, this time specifically targeting that crawl space beneath his home. December 21, 1978. Evening. When investigators descended into the narrow crawl space beneath John Wayne Gacy's house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the smell was overwhelming. The space was only about 3 feet high, forcing investigators to crawl through the darkness on their hands and knees, their flashlights cutting through the dusty air. Within minutes, they found the first body, then another, and another. The crawl space wasn't large, roughly 35 feet by 40 feet of dirt beneath the modest ranch house, but it had become a tomb for 26 young men and boys. Some had been buried in crude graves in the dirt floor. Others had been layered on top of one another as Gacy ran out of space. Many were positioned in almost deliberate arrangements, as if placed with care. Medical examiners would later determine that some victims had been buried while still alive. As word spread through the quiet Norwood Park neighborhood, residents emerged from their homes in shock and horror. Television news crews arrived. Reporters swarmed the street. The house where neighbors had attended summer parties, where children had watched a man dressed as Pogo the Clown make balloon animals, had been concealing unthinkable evil. The bodies in the crawl space represented most of Gacy's victims, but not all. Investigators learned that when the crawl space became too full, Gacy had changed his method. 4 more victims had been dumped in the Des Plaines River between 1976 and 1978. One of those victims was Robert Piest. His body was recovered from the river on April 9, 1979, nearly 4 months after he vanished. Gacy eventually confessed to killing 33 young men and boys over a 6-year period. His method was consistent and calculated. He would lure victims to his home with promises of construction work or simply overpower them. He would then restrain them, assault them, and ultimately kill them, often by strangulation or asphyxiation, sometimes forcing victims to participate in their own deaths, using a device he called the rope trick. Throughout his confession, Gacy showed little remorse. He was matter-of-fact, almost clinical in his descriptions. He claimed some victims deserved it or had initiated encounters. He portrayed himself as the real victim, a man misunderstood by society. John Wayne Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980, in Chicago. It was a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming. Bodies, physical evidence linking victims to his home, his own confessions. Gacy's defense didn't deny he killed these young men. Instead, they argued insanity, that Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder and wasn't responsible for his actions. They presented psychiatrists who testified about Gacy's troubled childhood, his repressed homosexuality, his fractured psyche. The prosecution presented their own psychiatric experts who found Gacy perfectly sane, a calculating predator who knew exactly what he was doing and went to elaborate lengths to conceal his crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On March 13, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of 33 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death for 12 of those murders. Judge Louis Garippo recommended that Gacy be executed. Gacy spent 14 years on death row at Menard Correctional Center. During that time, he granted interviews, painted disturbing artwork, often of clowns, and maintained his innocence, claiming police had planted the bodies in his crawl space. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. He was 52 years old. His last meal was fried chicken, fried shrimp, French fries, and strawberries. His final words were reported to be, "Kiss my ass." Outside the prison, crowds had gathered. Some cheered, some held signs, some were family members of victims, present to witness the end of the man who had stolen their loved ones. The victims of John Wayne Gacy were sons, brothers, friends, young men with futures stolen from them. Many came from troubled backgrounds. Some were runaways. Many were looking for work, for opportunity, for a better life. Gacy targeted the vulnerable, the overlooked, those he thought wouldn't be missed. But they were missed. They are remembered. Their names deserve to be known: Timothy McCoy, John Butkovich, Darrell Sampson, Randall Reffitt, Samuel Stapleton, Michael Bonin, William Carroll, James Byron Hackinson, Rick Johnston, Kenneth Parker, Michael Marino, William Bundy, Francis Alexander, Gregory Godzik, John Syke, John Prestige, Matthew Bowman, Robert Gilroy, John Mowery, Russell Nelson, Robert Winch, Tommy Bowling, David Talsma, William Kindred, Timothy O'Rourke, Frank Landingen, James Mazzara, Robert Piest, and the 5 young men whose remains were too decomposed to identify and whose families never got closure. The Gacy case changed how police investigate missing persons. It showed that serial killers don't always fit stereotypes. They can be successful, community-involved, seemingly normal people. It taught law enforcement to take disappearances of vulnerable populations seriously. Most importantly, it reminded us that every victim matters. Every life cut short leaves behind people who loved them, who search for them, who never stop hoping for answers.